Uh, all right, there we are. We will all be heard now. And let's see. The next agenda item is public comment. So I know we only have one visitor here, but at any rate, anyone who would like to provide any comments before we launch into the meeting? I'm seeing Stephanie shaking her head.
Yeah, I don't have
Right.
a presentation tonight or request. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen because we have a lot on today's agenda. And just one moment here. All right, do people see our opening PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Right. And I'll have to depend on others if people are chiming in, because I can't see everyone with the screen sharing. But just to go over the agenda, we've gone through our welcome and introductions. I don't think we have any committee check-ins, no public comment. Then we'll be briefly talking about updates, but really the main event and the reason for the 2 hours for the meeting is to really dive into the details of potential zone changes to implement the preferred land use concept for the area. And then the other main focus is to discuss the transportation project prioritization. So a bit of a continuation of our last meeting, and then we'll be wrapping up and we'll be sure to let you know about next steps. All right, just always remind people, project goals, there's definitely a reason for what we're doing, and I definitely want people to call us on implementation strategies which aren't moving the ball forward on the project goals. And amongst these are increasing commercial opportunities and neighborhoods serving businesses in the area, especially given the fact that it's not the best served area in town. Another goal is to increase housing affordability and choices, to expand active and green transportation access, and to improve public amenities, while we also work on anti-displacement strategies to make sure everyone is able to benefit from those improvements. And also using this committee and our other committees to collaborate on policy, technical expertise, and funding in the area. So updates. Last time we mentioned that we had posted the public involvement summary online. That's there for the broader public to see as well. And we also have posted the preferred framework report, and that gets into greater detail as to the public input that we'd received and how that led to the preferred community development scenario and the preferred or the project prioritization. And I should also mention that we had also posted amongst the public involvement documents basically the complete public responses to the survey information, including all of the open-ended responses. So if people really want to dive in deeper, it's on the project website under documents, under the public involvement documents. Any other updates? Chime in if you do have anything. Otherwise, I'm going to move us on. So moving on to concepts for zone changes. And I do want to be very clear with people that we don't have an actually formulated proposal yet. Right now, we're really at a conceptual point where we want to talk to you as our project advisory committee on the zoning change or zoning map approaches. And just to recap, and I hope people had a chance to take a peek at the slides we sent in advance, because there's a lot of material here. As people may recall, what emerged from all our public engagement and our PAC discussions was a preference for a centers and corridors concept. And that includes both the idea of creating a new neighborhood center for Brentwood Darlington focused around Flaville and 72nd, as well as increasing housing opportunities and in some cases, small business opportunities on the primary corridors such as 52nd, 72nd, and Woodstock, especially east of 72nd. So basically where we are now is trying to take those bubble diagrams and work on potential zone changes that could help implement those concepts. And just one other thing I wanted to share with people is just to remind us of one reason for this effort was our existing designated neighborhood centers or are places that really anchor the area with services, and that includes the Woodstock Neighborhood Center, as well as the Heart of Foster on Foster Boulevard, as well as the Lents Town Center. And as you're probably aware, there's a bit of a gap in terms of the Brentwood Darlington area in terms of having a robust business district and housing opportunities near a place like a center. So that's part of the reason we're looking at that 72nd and Faville area. I want to just have a caveat for what I'm sharing now. I sent in advance the concept for potential zone changes, and what we did here was to take our existing zoning map. So all the colors and zones that are shown here are already in place, but we overlaid on top of that in black outlines areas that we're looking at potential zone changes for, and we used red labeling to identify the potential new zones for those areas. And true to the concept, most of these zone changes are really focused on the center locations and those corridors. And it's impossible for us to make out this map. So I'm going to zoom into area by area discussion points. So we'll hold off on discussion until we get there. But also wanted to give people a little bit of a refresher or an overview of the zone changes we're looking at. There are basically two multi-dwelling zones we're looking at for this area. One is what we call the RM1 zone, and that's really a low-rise multi-dwelling zone, usually 2 to 3 stories, and it's intended to be compatible with single-family areas. You can't cover more than half the lot, and it's really intended to kind of continue some of the green landscape character of places. And then we also have the RM2 zone, and that's a zone 3 to 4 stories usually, and it's typically located in our mixed-use centers and along our major corridors. And just a thing to keep in mind with these zone names, whenever you hear a small number for the multi-dwelling zones, RM, small is smaller in scale, larger number is moving up the spectrum of scale. Now going to commercial mixed-use zones, you'll occasionally see small parcels that have CR labeled on them. And the CR zone, it's also known as commercial residential. It's basically your corner store zone. It's typically only a couple stories. And it's typically in places where you're surrounded by residential zoning, often single family. The CM1 zone, it's a relatively small scale mixed use zone, typically 2 to 3 stories. And then moving up the scale for mixed use, there's a CM2 zone, and that's a 3 to 4 story zone. Mid-scale zone, typically located in our centers and along our corridors. That's the zone you have most predominantly in the Woodstock Neighborhood Center and also along Foster for the most part. Any questions about that, in a way, thumbnail sketch of our zones? All right, I'm going to move on. And again, speak up since I'm not seeing everyone here. And let's hold off in discussion until we get into the zoomed in areas.
Hey,
but just
Bill,
yeah,
there is a question about parking requirement on those.
Sure.
Yeah.
For parking requirements in our multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones, basically for small sites under 10,000 square feet, and also if you're along a frequent transit service line, you're not required to provide off-street parking unless you have 30 or more units. There's also exceptions for projects that are using our inclusionary housing, affordable housing bonus provisions. And a big reason for this is that, especially for small sites, it's very expensive to fit in parking. When you're getting to higher densities, typically you have to do structured parking, which ends up being quite expensive. But yep, in most cases, no parking is required except for larger sites, especially when those large sites are not near frequent transit. I'm going to move us along. Just wanted to highlight topically the kinds of zone changes we're looking at, along with corresponding basically to the concept we had, the preferred scenario. There are some up zones at key intersections, and I've circled some of them here. And in many cases, we're going from that low scale mixed use CM1 zone and bumping up to that CM2 4-story scale. And also for the RM1 low-rise multi-dwelling zone, some of those existing zoned areas are being considered for RM2. And then we also have a number of zone changes related to expanding multifamily housing options along the corridors. And especially along 72nd, this could involve zone changes from single-family residential to that low-rise RM1 zone. And in some cases as well, especially along Woodstock, going from the low-rise RM1 zone to more of a corridor scale RM2, especially when you're getting close to Lentz. And I'll zoom into that area a bit further. Let's see. And then we have our, whatever we're going to call it, but I'm going to call it the Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Center for now. But the idea behind some of the potential zone changes here, we're adding additional commercial zoning to really support the idea of that becoming a Main Street area or a commercial services hub for the community, and then also providing additional multi-dwelling housing close to those services that exist and potential future services. And one thing I should remind people is that there is not a major imperative to upzone from any sort of city need for additional housing. This would really be intended to implement what we're hearing from the community in terms of what they'd like to have happen in this area moving into the future. So again, ideas for expanding housing options in the corridors and cultivating a neighborhood center. Diving a bit deeper into that Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Center, just wanted to highlight again what we're talking about here. And this is extending generally from the area around 72nd Faville and then eastward towards 82nd. And as I mentioned before, you can see with the red labels, there's a number of CM2 and CM1 areas. And in some cases, we'd be upzoning from residential to a commercial mixed use to allow more commercial services opportunities. And then also looking at expanding some of the multi-dwelling housing in the area. And this is a pretty complex area. So I'm going to jump right in to zoom in a little bit further, focusing first on the western end of that potential neighborhood center along 72nd. And just to walk you through some of the things that could be happening here. One is where you have the existing commercial hub at Faville and 72nd, which is currently CM1 zoned. We're looking at the idea of upzoning that to CM2 to allow 3 to 4 stories for what could be the core part of that neighborhood center. And then perhaps a bigger move is extending the commercial zoning south along 72nd to foster a commercial Main Street along 72nd. And this, and you can see in the diagram where you have the orange and light blue, we'd be looking at extending or applying commercial zoning, the low-rise CM1 zone southward for a block, and then probably another block or two south to Crystal Springs, at least on the western side of that street. And as you can also see, what's happening here is there's a existing R2.5 zoning to the west of 72nd near a grocery outlet. And that already allows townhouse type zoning or townhouse type development. And we're looking at the idea of applying multi-dwelling zoning to even further broaden the kind of housing that could happen in that area. Looking at RM2 zoning close to the corridor and RM1 zoning along 70th, moving a little bit further from the corridor. And there's all sorts of issues that we could discuss here, but one thing I wanted to put out there was what we have right now from about Lexington down to Crystal Springs is basically a main street with just on one side of the street. And on the eastern side of 72nd, keeping the multi-dwelling zoning because it's pretty established apartments. But something to consider is whether in the long term, we would want to allow commercial opportunities in that area. And I noticed that Anna has her hand up, but before let's go to Anna, just to highlight for people, the way zoning works is any use that's there right now can continue as it is for as long as the property owner wants to keep it. So zoning works basically when someone's proposing something new, it just expands what could happen in the future when redevelopment is proposed. Anna.
Yeah, I was wondering a little bit about the commercial zones because I remember we were talking last time or 2 meetings ago about the question of the difference between the residential mix and the commercial mixed zone. Because if you're allowing commercial mixed zones, that also allows a very particular way of commercials where you have like large box overbuild of those properties. And I'm just wondering if there are any incentives to not go there. To say like, okay, you have the allowance of having these commercial mixed zonings in terms of largeness and size, but we are not allowing these kind of, I'm just thinking about these storage container blocks that popped up in town. And I would think that would not really contribute to a good neighborhood center.
Good points. And to clarify, the commercial zones allow a broad range of commercial, and including retail and office, and in some cases even very light type manufacturing. But they don't allow self-service storage uses, so you couldn't do a self-service storage here, and you can't do a gas station, and you can't do a drive-through use either. So it's intended to be fairly pedestrian oriented in these zones shown here. It doesn't limit the size of that commercial use, but it tends to be difficult to do a large or big box use on the small lots that we have in this area. So, that could be a constraint. One thing I should mention too is that RM1 and RM2, when they're located on a major corridor, and that potentially could include 72nd, those zones do allow a small business, a small commercial use, but they're limited in size typically to like 1,000 square feet. So basically a cafe type thing, and you can't do it without residential being part of what's there. So it makes it easier for people to have a live work type use along with their house, but you couldn't put in a rite aid in the multi-dwelling zones on the corridor. It has to be along with residential. And I noticed Kathy had a comment about how this does not protect existing residents very well, given the fact that this could be allowing 3 to 4 story buildings adjacent to a housing. And that's a good point. The CM1 zone, one reason what we're looking at that as being the zone that would be applied is because it is in an area that is now residential. So CM1 would be more of that 2 to 3 story scale to keep it somewhat in keeping with the scale of the area. But 4 story scale would be something that allows in the CM2 and RM2 zones directly on the corridor. Any thoughts or comments about this slide or potential zone changes here? And I should mention the images, the bottom image is taken down by Crystal Springs looking northward. There are a couple, 2 or 3 very small buildings that are in the existing CM1 zone there. So that area has CM1 zone for a while, but not a whole lot of activity. And then, of course, you can see the grocery outlet intersection in the middle one. And then further the top images showing some of the residential area north of the grocery outlet area. So much of 72nd right now is fairly low scale residential, especially single family houses or small scale apartments. Other comments or thoughts about what we're seeing here in terms of possible zone changes? Something I should mention too, there's a lot here. And Cassie will be sharing a bit later a concept board where after the meeting, you could add your comments to this conceptual zone changes map. We could see some of this, the role of this meeting is to really get people at least introduced to the possible zone changes. I was definitely hearing concerns about Kathy about scale, and Anna raised some concerns. Is there anything people here is moving us in the right direction for this area?
I have a question.
Sure.
Will there be any kind of a design review so that, it would be really nice if a 3-story building is next to a 1-story, if there was some kind of, what do they call it, scaling, where you stair step up. Is there any chance that we'd be able to request that sort of design when they were building and asking to build?
There is a requirement in the code that when you have a 4-story type zone, like the CM2 zone, if it's next to a single family zone and needs to step down in scale. So instead of 4 stories all the way to the adjoining property, it needs to step down to more of a 3-story scale, which is the most that's allowed in the single family areas. And there's more of a requirement too for landscaping adjacent to the residential zones. And that just comes with the base zone. And notice Anna's got her hand up again. Anna.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm just having a question about, there's a code which has certain kind of ranges, but then we know that developers also have techniques of going above and beyond what zones are allowed. And so how do you deal with these exceptions of, height exceptions or I'm asking because we had very difficult discussions with the development on Woodstock, where all the scaling kind of suggestions that are in the code were completely failing because the developer goes like step by step by step, finding all the niches and cracks in the code to actually develop not only 4 stories, but 5 stories. And so I'm wondering, if there is some way of saying like, okay, we really have a very profound understanding of what those exceptions might be. And we are not going to say like, oh, we go to the design review in these very early stages, and then the exceptions are made, and then there is no rollback in the later stages. And this is something very, very difficult for land use committees and neighbors. Yeah. To discuss and to understand, and also to take it to the right levels of discussion, because it's usually not understood what's actually coming.
Yeah. In the CM2 zone, it's normally limited to 4 stories, but if you have a design overlay zone, it allows a 5th story, but that's in conjunction with a greater array of design standards and sometimes design review. So this area, we need to discuss whether the design overlay makes sense. Typically, we only apply it in the larger centers. So that's something to consider. In some of the other zones, the multi-dwelling zones, the only exception to exceed some of the bonus heights or the usual heights is when there's a lot of affordable housing provided, and specifically when at least half the units are affordable at a 60% of area median income. Then there's some flexibility to get bigger to prioritize affordable housing. And Scott, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Is it very easy to say, looking at this map right here with the potential up zones, how many more job opportunities there are versus what there is right now? Like a way to have a good quantification of that I get once you zone for it, that I mean, that's what's going to happen, but it has the potential for this many more jobs and also for this many more units, or I guess the density of units per acre than we currently have. Is that very easy to pull up?
Not something I could do right now, but we have some methodologies of, we did it for our buildable lands inventory where there's an estimate based on zoning of how much housing and jobs could be provided. And that could probably provide some estimate, but it's very ballpark because especially when as you get more and more localized, you don't know if someone's going to be provided any office or is it just going to be retail with a few employees. So it's hard to go by that by any realistic standpoint. But I could see what kind of analysis we could arrive at based on the usual ways we do that. And I should mention too that the amount of mixed use zoning here is pretty small compared to most of our centers. There's about 5 acres of existing mixed use zoning. And then the additional land going south from Grocery Outlet adds a little bit over 3 acres. It's only 8 acres compared to about 24 acres in the Woodstock Main Street. So it's not very big in terms of a business district that can have a wide array of services. And I noticed that Tim, I believe, had his hand up.
Can I follow up real quick, just like about that?
Sure.
Cool. The reason being for those numbers, I feel like we're at the point right now where all these zoning changes are going to start to feel scary. And it's going to be like, oh, now is when the rubber meets the road about, okay, well, if we have to bump up against them, there's going to be a lot of the scary negative things that come with that. And anything to emphasize the positive parts about it, like coming back to the housing crisis that we're in and providing housing for our neighbors, and anything that we can to be locally specific. So those sorts of numbers help me to put that in place.
We could bring those numbers forward, including what new opportunities could be opened up through the zone changes and what do you have on the ground right now. This area is very predominantly single family, and that's one reason why it's hard to cultivate a community hub with a robust business district here. But of course, we definitely want to hear people's thoughts. Tim.
Yeah, I'm kind of piggybacking off some of that because I think, like all of us, I'm picking up on, that sense of unknown about what these changes would bring. So I was just kind of curious if there's a general guideline when you do make these upzoning changes, what's the likelihood that spurs developmental interest in the area? Because I guess if that's kind of the goal of what we're doing here, and the existing zoning does not seem to be driving what we might be looking for a neighborhood corridor, are those changes, does that actually make a difference? Is that going to bring a developer in or something like that?
It's very incremental. And there's no guarantee that things are going to happen in the near future. It is really dependent upon whether there's interest amongst property owners and developers to do something there. An example would be 42nd Avenue, the edge of Cully, it's got fairly continuous commercial zoning, but it's got an existing mix of businesses and some residential, and much of the residential there has continued to stay despite the fact that we now have allowances for businesses to be there. There have been a couple of recent projects, new development coming in, but that's many years after that zoning was applied. So it's I hate to say it, but there's no guarantee, and it's hard to estimate when this could happen. And frankly, this would be a very different neighborhood center from most of our other designated centers, in that usually we applied the designation to an area that already had commercial zoning to really reinforce the function of that hub. This area is different because a fair portion of it has residential zoning. So it's not reinforcing an existing commercial main street. And that brings even more questions as to, how soon could this be a thriving main street? It's so hard to say. Let's see. I wasn't able to see who else raised their hands, at least with my screen sharing function, but if a staff person or someone could chime in.
Yeah, Anna. is
Yeah,
next.
Anna.
Anna and then Zeph.
And there's one in the chat, Bill, too.
And Lisa had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I see that Misa had spoken, to be curious too. And what incentives there might be to bring businesses to the new Lents Town Center. One thing we've talked about some is whether or not there could be what we call a neighborhood prosperity initiative here. There's one of those in the J District and in Cully. And that was started by Prosper Portland as a way to bring some new tools to bear to encourage small business retention and development. And that's something we have in our list of potential tools here that we need to talk to our partners about. Let's see, and does someone else have their hand up?
Anna had her hand.
Anna.
Oh, Anna.
I don't want to dominate here, but I have a question about, this kind of driving commercial development or kind of businesses into this. And I was wondering a little bit about those questions of home-based businesses, because I believe there are already a lot in the area. And how are we going to deal with those things to foster those things? Because they're also driving a lot of the needs in the neighborhood that might contribute to developing some of these kind of larger commercial developments. Do we have a good understanding how that is developing and how to support that even outside of the residential mixed use areas?
That's actually an important topic and a huge topic, and probably one we don't have time to spend a whole lot of time on, but it definitely goes beyond zoning. There's more that could be done to support small businesses, connect them to resources and knowledge, and especially for immigrant communities who may not have a lot of resources, connecting them things like commercial kitchens where they could make food and turn it into a business. But zoning itself doesn't do that. The primary way you might benefit the home-based businesses is there are a number of home-based businesses along 72nd. And even in the areas that are keep staying residential, if there are multi-dwelling zones, they could expand their business with fewer restrictions along that corridor. Like currently, I think you're limited to something like 8 visitors in your home-based business. But if you're along this heavily trafficked corridor, the zoning code provisions allow flexibility for more customers. It's less limited. I'm going to go to the next slide, but we definitely want to hear more from people. And again, I'm curious about what people think about the expansion of that commercial mixed use zoning, especially the CM1 zoning going south. And if you have any thoughts about, is that okay for it to just to be on one side of the street?
Hey, Bill, Zeph had his hand up though. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Sure, Zeph.
I was just I know I'm not a land use planner, but I feel compelled to say something here, which is just to make a point that we've heard loud and clear from this committee and from the public at large in the neighborhood so many times that people want to see more sort of pedestrian oriented, small local businesses, the little shops serving with all kinds of different services that you want. And in my experience, I think this is borne out by research, I'm sure, is that the number one thing that's going to attract those kinds of businesses is density, is having enough customers within that sort of walking, biking distance to serve those. And I think the reason you're seeing Grocery Outlet and other larger auto-oriented stores is because the area is so low density that they have to draw customers from really far away to make it pencil out. So just something to keep in mind, even though density can be scary and multi-story buildings and things like that, it's almost like the prerequisite for a lot of the businesses, just because they need customers. And if they're not going to drive, they need them nearby. So just a thought.
Yes, there's basically a twofold purpose for expanding the housing options in this area. I mean, one is to allow more people to be close to services, but also to expand the customer base for potential businesses in the area. And along with the active transportation connections, making it easier to walk or bike to the main street, that's also something that could make it more viable to have a business that could benefit from the local customer base. I'm going to move us on to the next slide because there's a lot to talk about before we move on to the transportation sections. This slide is showing the eastern end of the potential neighborhood center, and there are a couple major things that are happening here. One is this orange area south of Favell Street around Malden. It currently has R2.5 zoning, which is a townhouse type zone. And an idea to expand the housing options here would be to change the zoning to the multi-dwelling RM1 zones. So similar scale, but more flexibility for numbers of units. But there's a huge question about 82nd and Favell. This could potentially be kind of a second node to this neighborhood center and be a place which is the highest visibility in terms of traffic and transit that is adjacent to businesses. But that area on 82nd near Favell currently has employment zoning, EG1. It doesn't quite match necessarily what's there. Right now, there are a couple mini mart type things and a bar. There's a Mexican restaurant at the corner. And if you go to, I think, 83rd Avenue to the east, those small lots north of Favell appear to be entirely residential, which are actually prohibited in the EG1 zone. The EG1 zone allows light industrial employment, some retail, gas stations, drive-throughs, self-service storage, and it prohibits residential. And one thing that's been tossed around is the idea of should this be a node that's perhaps an anchoring point for this neighborhood center? The CM2 zone could be a possibility. It allows retail office, and it also allows residential or part of a mix of uses, and some light industrial. Some key differences from the existing EG1 zoning is it prohibits gas stations, drive-throughs, and self-service storage. And this is just a key thing I'm hoping the group can chime in on. Any thoughts about that future node or anchoring point at 82nd?
I think that would be great. Yes, to change it to CM2. That makes really makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep. Right. Now, thanks for sharing that. And I should mention that some areas along 82nd had commercial zoning until the comp plan, and then EG zoning was applied more broadly with the intent of really prioritizing employment zoning. The sites in this area are pretty small, so you're not going to really see a sunset corridor, major employment type thing. And again, there's a question mark about 83rd Avenue and the existing houses. It's hard to expand a residential use or enlarge your house because you're out of conformity with the zone. Other thoughts about this end of the neighborhood center?
Yeah, I support this. I also support this on, 72nd. But I'm wondering, you keep repeating a very important little point there, that the sites are actually relatively small, and that would prevent certain kind of developments. But what we see in those rezoning areas where there is already some establishment, that people are buying up several lots and combining them. So that would actually mean that you get much larger developments on those things. And I wonder if there is a way of preventing that, of saying like, well, yeah, you own all these lots, but you are not allowed to just combine them and consider them as one big development.
Yeah, that's our zoning code is apart from, I think, property ownership. So it's hard to really control for that. But there are certain kinds of uses that are associated with larger sites. So yeah, you typically need more space to have a self-service storage facility or a drive-through. It's harder to do that on a little 5,000 or 10,000 square foot site. So, the kinds of uses you allow have some implications for the scale of development that could happen there. Other thoughts in this area, and both about that, the 82nd Avenue portion and applying multi-dwelling zoning near Malden.
Just to clarify that, Bill, I feel like the question might be like, could somebody assemble a lot of lots and build a standalone big box store? Is that allowed under CM2?
It is allowed. It doesn't happen a lot because it takes a lot of time to acquire multiple properties, but it is possible.
So there is a question in the chat from Bevan about more employment opportunities if we change it from CM2 to EG1.
Or the other way, from EG1.
Or the other way, thank you, yeah.
I would not say that it increases the opportunity because both CM2 and EG1 allow office type uses, and both allow retail and commercial. So it's hard to say. EG1 does allow self-service storage facilities, which don't employ a lot of people. While that's not allowed in the CM2 zone. Sometimes you could have warehouse type zones too in the warehouse type development. But again, it's hard to say in terms of the numbers of employment you'll get. Again, we do know that some uses are not allowed in EG1 that tend to be fairly low employment density. But CM2, you could end up with nothing but ground floor retail and some housing. So you won't necessarily have very intensely employment type uses there either. So other thoughts? Notice Scott is chiming in support of CM2. And anytime either now or later after the meeting, be interested in hearing people's thoughts as to what would you see as being the ideal scenario for that area around 82nd and Flavel. And Tim, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess just kind of for discussion, I am finding myself really hard not to view your thoughts about whether or not to change the zoning based on what types of businesses exist in that area. Like I look at that 82nd and Flavel intersection and it's not, I don't know. I mean, you look at what some of those businesses are driving there in terms of traffic, and I know one of the bars recently turned into a strip club and some other things. So it's I can't, unbias myself. So I look at something like this, I'm like, yeah, change the zoning and maybe that changes the type of business that's there that would draw more foot traffic or draw more residents, stuff like that. And I just don't know if anyone else feels that same way when you look at that.
Thanks, Tim. Unless there are thoughts right now, I'm going to move us on so we can just cover some of the focus areas before we move on to transportation. But again, the concept board, which Cassie will walk you through a little bit later, will be open to everyone afterwards. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And let's see, oops, I went the wrong way. 72nd Avenue. So not straying too far away from the 72nd and Flavel area. There are a number of things happening here. Probably the most significant changes would be much of the area along 72nd between Henderson and going up towards Woodstock has single family zoning, although most of it's R2.5, which allows townhouses. And part of the concept that came out of the preferred scenario was expanding housing opportunities on that corridor. So what this is showing is for the area along 72nd that's not already multi-dwelling zoning, changing a zoning to that low-rise RM1 zone. And based on the feedback we received from the last PAC meeting about the scenarios, the zoning would extend to 71st Avenue to the west. Any thoughts about those changes along Woodstock? And I should also mention there's potential application of RM2 over near the Woodstock and 72nd node, and some minor changes going to CM2 there as well to allow a little bit greater scale at the commercial. And actually much of the commercial along 72nd, Woodstock North already has CM2 zoning. It would be just expanding that a little bit near that intersection. Thoughts on this one? And I'll just mention too, another big change here would be Woodstock east of 72nd, going from the existing RM1 low scale multi-dwelling zoning to RM2, allowing a bit more scale directly on that corridor. And also, if there's an area north of Woodstock, that's the western edge of the Lentz Town Center. And one concept here is changing the zoning from multi-dwelling RM1 to RM2, that 4-story, 3 to 4 story scale. Any thoughts on things here? And these images are showing some of that area. The bottom image is along 72nd in that kind of mixed residential area. And then the middle one is Woodstock looking east from near 72nd. And the top one is looking at Ramona, kind of near near 80th. So part of the area that could go to RM2. Much of the residential here, frankly, is pretty low scale.
Mhm.
And again, we a lot of stuff to chew on here. So we definitely want to provide opportunities for people to continue chiming in. And we're going to have probably at least a 3-month process where we're looking at the potential zone changes here. So it's not, tonight is not the end of things, and definitely should not be.
I was wondering if you could talk a little more about what's gone on at 72nd and Woodstock with the cool slip lane that has been pedestrianized. Does that change this decision-making process? Is there future stuff to go on with that about activating that space, that addition, like, okay, there's some city money coming in already there, that it makes sense to maximize what the zoning is for it? Is that just like too small of a one-off thing that it's not really going to affect any of this? I would be curious to hear city thoughts around that.
Yeah, I'll let Zeph or someone chime in from Peabot's perspective. But I could say in terms of a land use perspective, it's still really up to the community about how much of a community hub we want this to evolve into. I mean, clearly it seems that the triangle is serving as a bit of a community gathering place. Whether you expand commercial zoning there is a bit of a judgment call. And I think some of the 2 CM2 areas, properties or areas that would be changed already have a comp plan designation that would allow that, but this would bring a zone change along with the plan. Zeph, any thoughts there?
From my perspective, I think the CM2 zoning increase around the area can only help, because just the area needs more activity, more people, more businesses to really make that more of a community space. I think it's great what we've done, but if you go there, you'll see that we had to really design around a unique land use, which is like a drive-through shop, And so we had to have a one way in and one way out, and that's not really ideally what we'd want right next to that plaza. And so I see that property it looks like it's already zoned for CM2, but by increasing the zoning just to the east of there, it might make it more likely that somebody would buy up those lots and redevelop it. And then we could have housing and eyes on the street and more neighborhood serving retail. So I think this is pretty positive around that site. I would also note, I'll cover this in a moment when it's the transportation side, but just so people know the context, TriMet is proposing bus service for the first time on this section of Woodstock, frequent bus service. So that is well supported by density, by having more density along a bus route. And there's also a chance that we could get bus service on 72nd Avenue. So there is a transportation land use connection here.
Tim, I noticed you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this is close to my heart because I live real close to this, and I'm very supportive of these changes here. And what they did with the triangle, I think is great. I think Zeph was being a little kind. It's like a discount cigarette shop that the drive through, without making too many judgments apparent. I think that plot could be used for a lot more density. There's a couple of houses, if anybody's driven by, or housing developments that are like 3 stories, maybe 4 on the west side of 72nd by the park, that look like really good additions for building density in that area. And they look really nice. And they also look like they've been filled in, like there's no vacancy already. So yeah, I think that these changes in this area specifically seem really positive to me.
All right, other thoughts? And I'm not hearing something. I'm going to move on to the last focus area, and before we start transitioning to the transportation discussion. Oops, it took us the wrong direction again. Now we're looking at 52nd Avenue. And as you can see by the splotches of blue and pinkish zoning and then yellow or orange tones, it's kind of a very broad mix of zoning types in that area. But what the zone changes being looked at for this area include are really applying either multi-dwelling or small-scale mixed-use zoning more consistently along the corridor. And in some areas, especially south of Bybee, where we have the single-dwelling townhouse zoning, the RM2 zoning, there would be some changes to the low-scale RM1 zone, and a few cases where there's existing commercial, just applying commercial zoning. But the zone changes are especially shown near some of the major nodes. Up north, there's some idea for rezoning from the low-rise multi-dwelling to the RM2 zone, a little bit just north of Woodstock. And then over at Duke, especially given the fact that it's such a large site, the Faith property would be going to RM2 zoning from the current RM1. And then some of the low-rise CM1 zoning could go to CM2 in this area to strengthen that as a more of a commercial hub than it currently is. And then also there's some there's existing commercial CM1 zoning to the south around Flaville, and the images show that area. The bottom image, it almost has a very almost appealing, very small towny feel to it. But part of the idea is allowing or applying CM2 zoning in the core portion of that little commercial area. And so bear in mind, CM2 allows that 3 to 4 story scale. And it would be a departure from what's there. So definitely interested in what people think about the overall pattern of applying more multi-dwelling and mixed-use zoning here, and allowing the CM2 zoning at some of those key locations. Is 4 stories too much or not? Pam.
So Bill, there's some cultural institutions on, say, Flavelle. Moose Lodge is a community gathering spot. There's, and you can see it in the photo, there's a Hispanic church also at that intersection. So if the zoning were to change, are there any city programs that would help those institutions be rehoused in a larger development?
Probably the closest thing to it, there's not really a formal program. There is a bonus in the mixed use zones if you provide affordable commercial space. That provides you some additional scale in exchange for preserving that commercial space as an affordable space. And the zone change would really it doesn't really trigger any city program that would apply.
I think it's just would be a neighborhood concern, you know, if they were pressured down the road by a developer to sell out and then ultimately be displaced. So
Yep.
that was where my question was coming from.
Yeah, and actually Zeph brings up a comment related to that. And we would want to look at that. Who owns those structures, the Moose Lodge and the church. Stability, of course, is helped if they own the property, and we can look into that. And Kathy raises the concerns about the neighborhood character. This area where you're adjacent to the single family zoning, there would be a requirement that any 4-story building would have to step down in scale to the adjacent single family residential areas. But it would frankly be something that would allow scale that is different from what's there. Other thoughts on this one?
Scott has his hand up, and Bevan, and Pam too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, Scott followed by Bevan.
Yeah, I have a question about the RM2 area where the Apostolic Faith Church is, and if there's opportunity for conversation with them, can they be brought into this discussion a little more about the potential of utilizing that space? Because there's such a long-standing institution there since like 1902 that it doesn't seem like they're about to leave. And so looking at this map, I wonder, A, if that conversation can happen, and B, if it's not, this looks a little, I don't know what the right way, deceiving about how much would happen because it's such a big lot that might not have anything change because they have their own institutional objectives.
Yes, good points. We really do need to engage the Apostolic Faith Church in any zone change to that property. The zone change would have no bearing on their ability to continue what they're doing there. It just, if for any unforeseen situation were to come and they were to develop part of their property, it has happened in some cases that some religious organizations have done some affordable housing. Can't say whether that could be a possibility, but we would want to talk to them about that potential zone change.
I remember years ago, they made an agreement that they wouldn't, that the housing they were building for their conferences would never become a lived-in, year-round kind of place. I remember that. That's been years since they made that agreement. And then they did do housing in their administrative building recently there on 52nd. So, they have made some changes in use on one of their properties. Anyway.
And I didn't mention, and someone brought it up that to the north, on the north side of Duke, where you have a single family zoning, and I think where their administrative offices are, it would concept is it goes to RM1 there. So the low rise multifamily.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely need more discussion about this possibility. Okay, other thoughts about this area? And actually,
Hand up.
someone else had their hand up.
Bevan has his
This is
hand up.
Bevan.
Bevan.
So I live off of Ivy, maybe 5 blocks east or so. I overall really like the direction you're heading. I think this is what, you know, the survey results were showing, and overall the discussion that I've been hearing. So I think this is great. I am curious, there's like just north of Ivy, there's a little kind of chunk of CM2. And I'm kind of curious why you would, you know, rezone that, but perhaps wouldn't rezone some of that CM1 area that's already sort of active businesses, kind of where Mary's Cafe and Misdemeanor Meadows is. So what's the logic behind sort of leaving quite a bit of the CM1 as is instead of upzoning it?
You know, I don't have a great answer to that. Marty had a key hand in beginning that translation from the concept diagram to the zoning. What I see here, though, is if that area would go to RM2, which was allowed 4-story zones, having that Cooper and a 52nd property go to CM2 would continue that 3 to 4 story scale could reinforce that as a little bit of a subnode, that Cooper and 52nd intersection. That's all I can make of it, but definitely interested in people's thoughts, because there's no reason it has to get a CM2. You know, it could stay CM1 consistent with what's to the south of it.
Is there any reason not to connect the CM2 zoning sort of, you know, from that little block down, say to Flavel, or at least up zone the existing CM1? Like,
well, I think the main thing this is trying to honor was the idea of not creating a continuous main street along here, but focusing more on these key intersections along 52nd. That's, you know, so the idea is it's not going to be a very continuous main street like Woodstock is, but smaller scale in much of it, but at some of the key locations, so allowing a bit greater scale. But definitely open to discussion, not written in stone.
Awesome, thanks.
Let's see, and Zeph is flagging, saying it looks like Misdemeanor Meadows is already CM2. Is CM2, I mean, is Misdemeanor Meadows where that the CM2 arrow is pointing to?
No, I want to make sure I'm reading this right. So Misdemeanor Meadows is the northeast corner of Bybee and 52nd. So it has the same color as the CM2, but it looks like it's maybe not changing. Is that right?
Actually, existing CM2 is that kind of reddish orange that you see on Woodstock. Yeah. There actually isn't any CM2 on 52nd. So anything that's like a light pink is just CM1.
I see. Okay, I misunderstood. So disregard my comment there.
You know, I'm going to move us on just to really set things up for people to provide comments later, because again, we definitely want to capture more. Let's see. We know there are additional thoughts, and one thing we wanted to highlight is that Cassie has created a concept board that you could link to now or later, post meeting. And we're interested in keeping that concept board open for a while, probably at least through next Monday, if not longer. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see if Cassie wanted to walk you through that for a moment, at least the basics, where you can find this concept board and how you could provide comments. And that's really to be one way of capturing more comments on these zone change ideas. Cassie, are you ready for us?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I put a concept board link into the chat. If you could all kind of click on that. And then I'm going to share my screen and show you kind of how to navigate in it and how to leave comments. And then any other things you want to do, you can't figure out, go ahead and you can email me, send me a message. Let's see here. Let me share. Oh, I need permission to share.
Oops. Let me turn you into a co-host just a second. See if that works for you now.
Okay. Yep. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So first, I'm going to kind of show you how to navigate, zoom in and out. A really quick, the link that I gave you should bring you right to this, this zone map that Bill's been kind of going over in detail. Real quickly, to zoom in and out, if you're using a regular mouse, you can just use the wheel to go in and out. And then down, and then if you want to pan, you can use the hand up here in the corner. Down in the left corner here, there's a selection of zoom tools, including if you have a trackpad, you can choose that as an option. And then you can also, it should give you the tool, and you can kind of zoom in and out using that tool as well if your mouse is being a little clunky. So that's the 101 for navigation. It's pretty simple. If you want to do a full extents, like see the entire board, you can choose this little compass here, and it will zoom. It should zoom. Oh, it's not working for me right now, but you can also just, oh, sorry, it's this. If you do fit, you can fit the whole board on your screen, and you can see everything. And while we're here, I'll just show you what we've got on the board for you all to look at. There's the map that Bill's been going over. There's the original concept, the preferred development scenario that you've all seen a lot. A breakdown of the different types of land uses and zones, and a little bit more detail, similar to the slide that Bill showed you earlier. And then this is a reminder of the 4 scenarios we originally had to begin with. And then real quick to show you how to leave a comment. Up here, there's this little comment tab in the gray toolbar. If you just click on that, this is probably the easiest way to leave a comment. You just click on that and click wherever you are wanting to leave a comment on the board, and then just, you know, provide your comment. The other easy way to provide a comment is if you want to leave a sticky note, you can choose your color, you can get fancy if you want, and just kind of leave it wherever you want on the board. Those are 2 really easy ways. If you want to draw, there's a scribble tool here. Highlighter, kind of if you want to highlight anything, and then some shape tools if you want to get really fancy. And that's it. Any questions? Otherwise, I think anyone having trouble getting in to the board?
Yeah, send an email to us if you have any trouble, and Cassie can follow up.
Yeah.
Definitely want to give Zeth and team an opportunity to get to the transportation components.
Yep.
I'm going to very briefly share a little bit more. Just wanted to give people just a heads up as to what's next for at least what staff is doing for the zoning code concept. We're undertaking an economic analysis to see the extent to which the zone changes could be contributing to displacement. One thing we want to do too is identify where there are existing low-cost apartments. The idea being maybe applying that smallest scale RM1 zone or keeping that zoning in some cases to limit redevelopment pressure that could happen in conjunction with larger zoning code allowances. We're also looking at infrastructure constraints with our other city bureaus to see whether there's some considerations that could impact the zoning that's applied. We do want to do additional outreach to groups that were underrepresented in the survey. So reaching out to more BIPOC groups. We haven't really connected a whole lot with the Asian communities in the area, and more communication with renters. We are also wanting to go and talk to the neighborhood associations about these zoning ideas, as well as the 82nd Avenue Business Association. So more on that later. And just a major next step is the most broad public engagement that's going to happen in terms of the next thing is going to be when the discussion draft is released, likely in February or March. And that would be accompanied by a much more extensive engagement, open houses, and really just making sure everyone sees and is able to comment on a more refined proposal. But that's it. I know this is a lot, and apologize to Zeph for being a little bit over, but I wanted to hand it over to you, Zeph.
Yeah, for sure. So switching gears here to transportation, you can go to the next slide. So the main things we wanted to discuss today were TriMet's Forward Together concept, which has proposed changes for the transit network. And what we'd like is your feedback on what should this plan be saying about transit to inform TriMet's plan. And then project prioritization for the corridor, neighborhood greenway, and local street projects that we've shown before. And then a little bit about next steps. So next slide. So hopefully some of you are aware of this, maybe not. TriMet has been working over, since early summer, analyzing the bus network. This is in response to COVID, which they found has really changed ridership patterns. So people are just riding the bus differently. There's fewer people going downtown in the peak hours. There's more people riding certain lines and fewer people riding other lines. And so TriMet is really looking at a revenue neutral, just reshuffling their existing service hours to better serve the community. And they call this Forward Together. We have been passing them along the feedback that we've gotten through Lower Southeast Rising and the concepts that we developed, and really happy to report that they've really taken a lot of our ideas into consideration and long-standing community priorities. And so I'll describe those. The image right here is just a reminder of what we put in the online open house for our concept. And some key things were to keep the line 19 on Woodstock to serve Woodstock and Lentz more directly, directly connecting Woodstock Main Street to the Lentz Town Center on this neighborhood corridor, Woodstock. We also proposed having the line 10 run down 72nd Avenue to provide that north-south service, moving off of Outer Herald, and then having the 71 stay on Flavel to provide east-west service to the MAX station. What I'm about to show you is a little bit different, but it's similar. So next slide. So this is a zoomed in shot of what they're proposing, and they have this open for public outreach, for public comment right now. If you search for TriMet Forward Together, you'll see all their concepts and can give them feedback. What you'll notice is there's a line 4 on Woodstock. So this is the line 19, but what they're proposing is to take the line 4 up in North Portland and interline it, so run through downtown, and then it would become what is currently the line 19 basically, but it would provide some of those crosstown trips. If you wanted to ride through downtown, you could do that to go to North Portland instead of to Gleason. But the more important thing is that this would follow our recommendation to stay on Woodstock connecting to Lentz, and it would become a frequent service line for the first time. So this would be every 15 minutes, all day, every day into the evenings service. So much better service for Woodstock in this proposal. Also, this isn't shown here, but that line would run over the Tillicum Bridge, not the Ross Island Bridge, as the line 19 does today. That's something that we've heard. I remember Stephanie, talking about this years ago. Like, this is something the neighborhood has wanted for a long time, is to have a more direct ride to downtown. And the combination of that, and they're also eliminating what they call the Rex Loop in Eastmoreland, which is a big deviation. They're going to just stay on Woodstock. So for people who are riding downtown on that line, it should be a lot faster and more direct. They're proposing to have the line 71 stay with its current routing on 52nd and Flavel and 72nd. but that would also become a frequent service line. So that combination really means that 52nd, part of Flavel and Woodstock would all have frequent service. And then for the line 10, they're proposing to move off of Herald entirely and have the line 10 take over a section of Duke from 52nd to 72nd, then run down 72nd to Flavel, and then go east to the Max station. So the 10 is the remaining sort of stair-step pattern line in this proposal. So other than the line 10 and 71 flopping places, this is pretty close to what we had proposed. Was there a question about that? Stephanie?
Oh, I didn't have a question, but I just wanted to point out that something else that's wonderful about the TriMet plan is that we now can get down to that big shopping center at 82nd and Johnson Creek Boulevard in multiple ways, whereas before it was very difficult to get down there by transit. You had to get over to 82nd, right, but there weren't any connections to 82nd, or very many. And so right now, basically, our entire neighborhood has service down to that that shopping center. So I was really really happy about that.
Thank you. I completely forgot to let people know about the line 19 at the bottom of the screen that you can see. So that means the line 19 that's on Gleason, that line is going to go through downtown, then down Macadam, then across the Selwood Bridge, and then on Tacoma and Johnson Creek Boulevard to the Fuller Max station. And so, yeah, with some transfers like the southern area, you'll be able to get to that that node there, and that's brand new bus service on Johnson Creek Boulevard. There's also the line 150 you see on the right edge. That would be a pretty low frequency, like once an hour service on 92nd Avenue, and then it would go into Happy Valley. And the outer Herald section that the line 10 currently runs on would be taken over by another bus route on 148th Avenue, and then it would cut over to Outer Herald. So people east of I-205 would not lose service. They just would have a different bus route. Anna?
Yeah, I think those are really great suggestions. I was wondering about 19, and you already answered a little bit of it. So it goes over Selwood Bridge. Is there then a connection to actually go further into the southwest? Because right now there's no decent connection. You have to go to downtown and then out to southwest from here.
Unfortunately not. They do have a long-term plan to have an east-west line that would use Taylor's Ferry and then go across the Selwood Bridge, but that's in their sort of that's in their list of things they would need new revenue for. This plan is what to do if they just kind of shift their existing resources around.
That brings me to another question I had when you said they were looking at how ridership is developing after or during COVID, after COVID. Since there has been so much reduced service, it has been really cumbersome to actually use it. And I switch lines on a constant basis to figure out how do I get fast enough where I have to go, because those travel lines are so long. So I wonder how they get reliable information, which routes people are taking, because I assume everybody who uses this regularly is just jumping around like crazy right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're mostly using the hop card data now that pretty much everybody's using the hop cards. They have really good data on where people are using it, and they can analyze those trends. One thing to keep in mind is that this plan is assuming a restoration of the cuts that they've had to make during COVID, because those cuts are tied mainly to an operator shortage. And they know they have to solve that problem, and they need to hire more operators. And so this plan is an increase in service over what's out there today, because this plan is assuming that they hire enough drivers and can actually restore that service. So we should move on to what we're most interested in hearing your feedback on is this question, which is, should TriMet stick with what they have in the plan right now in this draft concept they've put out, which is the Duke option on the left, Or should they do what we're calling the Herald option, which is something that we as staff developed as a way to basically serve more of 72nd Avenue with transit service. The only difference would be whether it uses Herald or Duke to get from 52nd to 72nd. And then in the Herald option, it would cover a little more of 72nd, but it would take service off of Duke entirely. So there are trade-offs here, but we're interested in this question. And to help us with that, the next slide, I think we overlaid the transit service on our land use map to try to get a handle on this. So this shows the Duke option in blue there, but it also shows the neighborhood corridors and the other and the neighborhood centers that are proposed. And what you can see is that the Duke option is serving the Woodstock neighborhood center, but then it's running on a section of Duke that doesn't have quite as high of densities along it. And then it does go and serve the Flavelle and 72nd Avenue new neighborhood center at the end there. And then the next slide, you can see the Herald option. The big advantage for this one that we see is that it still gets pretty close to the Woodstock neighborhood center, but it also serves the Heart of Foster neighborhood center that's now expanded down to Woodstock more directly. And then it would serve more of 72nd Avenue on its way down to 72nd and Flavelle. It would also serve the Mount Scott Community Center and the park,
Right. Mhm.
whereas the Duke option would skip that entirely. Next slide. We did some of these, what we call isochrone maps. So these show how many jobs and residents, what area you could reach within 30 minutes transit travel time from a given point. And it's in both directions. So it's really where could you go, but also what's the area that could get to that area. So we did this for the 3 centers that are proposed. So 72nd and Herald is right by Mount Scott Community Center, right by the park, and it's right in that proposed center. And you can see in the blue area that it really increases access to and from that point for the southern part of Brentwood Darlington, kind of 2nd and Flavelle area. And it also expands it west to the Reed area. And there's just a couple small areas that are only reachable, that are left behind compared to the Duke option. And there's more residents and jobs, quite a bit more. You can see on the table on the bottom left, you can see there's more residents and jobs reachable there. Next slide. Next one is from 72nd and Flavelle, so right at the grocery outlet. There's less change here, less of an impact, but it does expand the transit reach for that sort of Foster and 72nd area around the Mercado, all of that area. Next slide. And what this is showing is that if you're in the middle of the Woodstock Main Street, neither of these options really matter. You can get all the same places in half an hour. And what this is kind of demonstrating is that this question of Herald versus Duke doesn't matter a lot to people who are traveling through the neighborhood because they're pretty equivalent travel times, but they matter a lot depending on where you're going within the neighborhood. So forget if there's another slide here. Nope. So maybe go back to the one showing Herald and Duke side by side. So, you know, you can kind of tell where we're leaning as staff. We think there's a lot to be said for the Herald option in terms of serving higher density land uses and serving especially the community center, the park, and the Mercado area. There's just a lot of destinations there. And what we've heard from the public is wanting that north-south service on 72nd, which the Duke option doesn't get you much service on 72nd. It's just a little jog. The downside would be that people on Duke, like around Brentwood Park or the community gardens, those kinds of places, would have a little farther to go. But if you look on the right, if you're at 60th and Duke, you are a relatively short walking distance, about 5 minutes from the new frequent service on Woodstock and the new frequent service on 52nd Avenue. We can also do things like prioritize bike lanes and pedestrian improvements to maybe make up for that. But TriMet let us know that parks by themselves are not very good generators of transit ridership, whereas community centers are, because they have more classes and things and more activities and things like that. So they were, when we talked to them about this, they were pretty comfortable with this Herald option, but we wanted to hear what you all think and if there's any concerns about losing service on Duke. Yep, Tim?
I was just gonna say, from the Mount Scott Arleta perspective, the neighbors I talked to, we really liked having the bus service on there. I mean, I can walk to the Parkland Community Center, but I was also just gonna point out that the community center at Mount Scott's about to go under renovation, and it looks really nice, and that might even make it more appealing for people from outside the neighborhood to be coming into. And I think that's supposed to go up in the next couple of years. So yeah, definitely for the Herald.
Great. Misa?
Hi, I just have a few concerns. Anything that takes away from it being focused on Brentwood Darlington bothers me, and Herald is Arleta, Mount Scott Arleta. Duke is still on the cusp of Brentwood Darlington. I'm on a meeting. Shh. And what bus line would serve Duke? Because that's a huge chunk of Brentwood Darlington that would have to walk with no sidewalks. Plus there is no pedestrian crossing between 52nd and 72nd on Woodstock. It's extremely dangerous to cross. Anyway, that's just my main concern is it's really hard to get anywhere on the buses, and to just add this and then to get to the green line now sounds complicated. I was hoping that there would be a straight shot on Flavel, but now it looks like it's broken into two buses. Anyway, I'm just sharing my concerns because I just always want to bring it back to Brentwood Darlington, what best serves that focus area.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I would say that the Duke option has more bus service in Brentwood Darlington. That's true. But it really depends on where are you going. Is it better to have that service within Brentwood Darlington or connecting Brentwood Darlington to another area? So
I think it's also important how you get to the bus, not just where you're going, but how you access your first, getting onto the bus, not just where you're going. And I just feel like that's really difficult for Brentwood Darlington people to get to Herald.
Yeah, it would be a change. That's a good point about the crossings on Woodstock. One thing I think is that having the bus service on Woodstock, the frequent bus service, will make it a lot easier to get crossings on Woodstock, because we have policies that say there should be a crossing at every bus stop. It's harder, it's literally harder for us to get crossings approved on streets that don't have bus service. So I do think that the line 4 that will now serve Woodstock will make it just easier for us to get the approval to mark those crosswalks. And that's something that we definitely want to do. That's a high priority for us. Another thing would be that there are sidewalks on all the streets connecting Duke to Woodstock. So there would be an additional walk, but at least there are sidewalks in that area. And but I won't pretend it's not an impact. It is an impact. This proposal would have no bus service on Duke at all. As it is, the TriMet proposal on the left would remove service on Duke from 72nd to 82nd, but they would leave it from 52nd to 72nd. And what we're proposing would move that up to Herald. So there is a trade-off there. Yep, Bevan?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Misa's comments as a Brentwood Darlington resident that uses that Duke bus line. It's a bummer to see it, potentially go. I do understand the Herald option, and I think, bigger picture, it probably makes more sense. But, as long as we have safe routes to bus lines and, alternative transportation, some of these things that we're discussing, I think, I'd feel more comfortable with this if if we get this process enacted see some of the upgrades, more or less committed to that would make it safer to get to these bus lines or other transportation options.
Yeah, that makes sense. We do also have a funded project on Duke, as probably most people know, to fill in the sidewalk gaps. So that should make it a lot easier for people to maybe walk along Duke to 52nd or 72nd if they need to catch the bus in these options. But yeah, overall, I would say that it's really challenging, we found, in a revenue neutral way to satisfy everybody's desires for bus service on Duke and Herald and 72nd. Something's got to give. And so one thing to keep in mind is that this is just a proposal for this sort of near-term TriMet investments. If, as we hope, TriMet gets new revenue at some point in the future, then very likely we could get bus service on Herald and Duke. So it's really it's a matter of limited resources that is sort of forcing this choice upon us. Anna?
Yeah, I have a question of how to go about it, because I take the bus on 52nd quite a bit, and I see a lot of kids going to school early in the morning. And this is a group that really relies a lot on bus traffic or public transportation to get to places in general. And I wonder if that might be a good approach to figure out which line would be more interesting for this age group to actually navigate, because that's also the age group that we want to educate in taking the public transportation as a general mode of transportation. And if you give them the feeling that, once you get out of school, you're gonna drive by car anyhow, and you're gonna have it so much more fun and so much more easy. I wonder if there is an incentive to think about how can we make it, really a great experience and a fast traffic mode for these younger kids in order to develop some future activity around there.
Yeah,
without frustration.
Yeah, those are great thoughts, and we definitely want to do more outreach with the schools in the area and find that out. I think most of the kids there are riding the line 71 on 52nd and Flavel, because that's closer to the school than up on Duke. That's my impression, and that's kind of where the safe routes to school are located. But yeah, those are really good thoughts. We might need to move on in the interest of time. We've got some other types of projects to cover. So yeah, we'll take all your comments there, and feel free to send comments to me after the meeting as well. We just want to craft our message to TriMet, and also what should we put in the plan? Like I said, we could put in a near-term recommendation and a long-term recommendation if we wanted to say that Duke, should have bus service in the future. We can certainly do that. But we feel some time pressure to give TriMet a recommendation for the near term. So we want to talk about these neighborhood greenways and corridor improvements and local streets that we've talked to you about before. We've done some initial prioritization, and we're having trouble with some of it, and really could use your help deciding between some projects. So next slide. So this is a general overview of how we're thinking about prioritizing projects. So first we have our kind of project list, and then we want to develop tier 1 and tier 2 projects. And really, it's not like for this project, this plan, it's not like we have a set dollar amount that we are working with. We're going to have to seek funding for most of these projects. But the idea here is that if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and it really helps to focus our attention. If something's a tier 2 project, it doesn't mean it's not a priority at all. It would go into our transportation system plan as sort of eligible projects for funding. But it kind of means that you can see on the lower right there that we would fund them opportunistically. If the right circumstances happen, a redevelopment happens or something like that, Sometimes just opportunities come up and we can implement these just anytime. But the tier 1 projects are where we would focus our active attention trying to develop the projects and seek funding for them. And we're thinking that we would identify some of these with higher cost needs, like if they need protected bike lanes with curbs, and they need crossings with islands and curb extensions, things like that. Those might go into a larger program to go after grants for. So maybe another regional flexible funds grant for the area. And then other projects will probably go in the smaller programmatic category that we can fund just low cost, cheap projects a lot faster if we can do the project at a lower cost. Next slide. So these are our corridor improvements. These are a refined set of what we showed last time. These are focused on reducing speeding, improving comfort, and serving multiple modes on these busier streets in the neighborhood. Next slide. The prioritization factors that we considered was whether it's serving an existing or proposed center or corridor, so really serving the land use. We tried to give more priority to projects within Brentwood-Darlington because that is our focus area. We looked at documented safety issues and crash rates on streets, and we prioritized some of those segments. We looked at connectivity, just how useful is sort of the network that develops. We looked at transit service as kind of part of that. We looked at public support that we heard in our outreach, and just thinking about the needs versus the costs and the cost benefit. And our goal is to identify, this is somewhat arbitrary, but we just, to give ourselves some like ground rules, we are aiming for small projects totaling about $5 million, and then 1 or 2 big projects that would go after grant funding of around that same size. And that'll help us narrow this down. Next slide. So this is where we kind of landed at least our initial first pass. So the bolder ones are the proposed tier 1 projects. The dashed ones are the proposed tier 2. So you'll see a lot of Woodstock on that list, east of 52nd Avenue. We have Flavelle Street, the whole stretch. So Woodstock and Flavelle both serve multiple neighborhood centers. And so that's seems like, clear winners there. Same with 72nd Avenue, connecting the 2 proposed neighborhood centers together. 52nd Avenue is sort of this, series of commercial nodes like Bill was showing, and a proposed neighborhood center. We're showing south of Woodstock, mainly because that's sort of the heart of the Brentwood-Darlington area and the commercial area. And also north of Woodstock, it's a little harder to do the bike lane component because it would force us to remove parking on both sides of the street. The street's a little wider south of Woodstock, and we could just remove parking on one side of the street. But also it's more in the core of the project area. And then you'll see some of the tier 2 projects are a little harder to implement, like really, really expensive, like some of the ones on the southern area there, Harney, Clatsop, and Flavelle Drive. Really just extremely expensive to get any sort of improvements in those streets. And they're also kind of at the periphery of the neighborhood. The Woodstock Main Street you'll see is tier 2. That's mainly because we thought, all things considered, the Main Street's pretty good. Not that it doesn't have problems. It would still be a tier 2 project. It would still be on the list. But just as far as focusing our attention, Woodstock is already quite a pedestrian-oriented area, and maybe doesn't need as much as some of the other streets. That little bit of 46th Avenue south of Woodstock, that popped up on our safety analysis as a high crash area. So that's why that sort of popped up. And some that we had trouble with were Duke and Herald and Steele. So just to go through those, Duke we weren't sure about, mainly because we already have a lot of funded projects that are taking care of that. We have funded projects for speed bumps, for sidewalks, and for crossings. Really the only thing left on Duke would be bike lane improvements. And we weren't sure how much to prioritize it, since it's pretty close to Woodstock, and we're taking care of a lot of the needs. and it's not directly serving one of the neighborhood centers. And then Harold, kind of similarly, is not hitting as many of the land use proposals, and is already a fairly calm street. I know it has some issues that have been reported. And then Steele is sort of also a little bit farther out from Brentwood Darlington, a little off the beaten path. But the reason we have question marks here is because Steele and Harold do, for the connectivity piece, it is a big east-west, main spine through that part of the neighborhood. And we're not sure if we want to leave those completely in tier 2. So it'd be great to get some feedback on those, or just this in general. Lisa?
I'm sorry, what do those numbers mean at the beginning? The CL or CI?
Those don't mean anything. Those are just how we've labeled them. The thing to look at is the bold projects with you can see in the upper right the legend. So there's tier 1 projects, there's the sort of undecided, and then there's the tier 2 projects. So those are really what to pay attention to there.
Tim's got his hand up.
I was just going to ask about Harold and whether or not the community center and the Mercado and those things we talked about in the last sort of iteration of this would sort of raise Harold in the priority of corridor improvements. I mean, it's not necessarily a town center, but certainly a destination center.
Yeah, for sure. It does connect to that center. It's more like on the western side, it's not connecting to quite as much of the dense land uses, but yeah, that's something that makes Harold a little higher up. Also, if Harold does have bus service, that would also make it, just more of a priority, I would say. We're a little unsure of what we can do on Harold, to be honest. We already did speed bumps, and that's our main traffic calming tool. We've heard a desire for stop signs, but it's really hard to get stop signs approved when there's a lot more traffic on one street than the side streets. So I think that would be pretty challenging to get stop signs. So, we could do things like mark a lot more crosswalks, and maybe that would help slow down traffic more. But it's hard to think of a lot to do other than that. I'm not sure who was next. Bevan, I don't feel like we've heard.
I think Bevan and then Anna.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I would love to see improvements on all these streets, but given the need to prioritize, I do feel like Harold and Steele, compared to a lot of the streets in Brentwood Darlington, seem very nice and already have quite a few improvements. And so I think the prioritizations that you guys picked actually make a lot of sense.
Great, thank you. Anna?
Yeah, I mean, I have two hats right now. So from the Woodstock Neighborhood Association point of view, we got a lot of requests to slow down Steele because there are a lot of issues with accidents and, also the access to the school. On the other hand, I think the focus, because they're really nice streets, and it seems to be like issues that are really targeted at specific moments in the day or in the year. And I think the focus should be on the Brentwood Darlington side of things. But what we were discussing was people who had all these issues with the traffic. They say like, yeah, speed bumps, I don't know if that really works. But what's really the issue is that there are no visual distractions. And people felt like if there would be something, that narrows down the visual field on those streets, that would actually calm down a lot of the traffic, which I found really interesting. So people started to think about, shall we have like banners just saying like, school here, festival there. just to get people slowing down to reduce the visual field. And I wonder if there are other ways of designing those streetscapes in this kind of manner.
Yeah, one thing for Steel is that one thing we've thought about is just striping bike lanes might provide some of that narrowing of the roadway visually. And so I think how high we prioritize Steel might have to do with the next section, which is on the neighborhood greenways, because we're having a similar debate internally about the neighborhood greenway on Steel going east of 52nd. And so really this project and that project work together to provide an east-west bikeway. And if we prioritize that, then it would make sense to make this a tier 1 project. If we don't, then maybe just some small improvements like you're talking about would be enough. Maybe not, maybe we don't need to do a major investment. So
Zeph, just a time
yeah.
check. We have 5 minutes officially in the meeting.
Okay, let's move quickly through these last bits. So next slide. We can skip past this. This is just another description of those projects. So getting into neighborhood greenways. So these call them local streets where we build our bike network. You can see the existing bikeways and funded bikeways in the narrower lines in the background. And then you can see all of our neighborhood greenways we proposed. We did make a change a couple changes since the last time we talked. We did add back neighborhood greenway on Tolman west of 52nd, even though that needs street paving because we got a lot of feedback in favor of that project. We also consolidated the greenways around 60th Avenue to just all be on 60th Avenue. So we thought this provides a really nice north-south connection through the neighborhood and provides some of those connections to the school and the park, you know, by biking and walking that we know are important. So next slide. So the prioritization factors we looked at were sort of looking at equal spacing of the greenways to provide coverage around the neighborhoods, connectivity to destinations and land uses, just overall usefulness. Is it a long greenway or is it just a short little connection that's not very useful? Focus on serving Brentwood Darlington, low cost and easy to implement, and thinking about the public support that we got. Next slide. So this is kind of where we landed on the neighborhood greenways. So like I said, 60th Avenue seems really important to provide a north-south bikeway between 52nd Avenue and the funded 60s bikeway on 68th Avenue. Good access to the school and the park and everything like that. The Tolman neighborhood greenway seems really useful, just a really long east-west bikeway that's pretty nice and calm right now. The section east of 52nd is easier to implement than west of 52nd, but we know it's still really important. And then the sort of Nehalem Harney one at the bottom provides really good access for the southern part of the neighborhood, which really doesn't have any bike routes right now. Lambert is a very easy connection because we have a funded crossing at 82nd Avenue. And that would be a really useful connection and also serves the new center that Bill was showing. And then 46th Avenue in the upper left, that's mainly for spacing, just to have a bikeway in that area. And then the Knapp Greenway really is needed to complete the Knapp Ogden neighborhood greenway that has only been funded east of 52nd and provide access to the west. You'll see some of the tier 2 projects are either kind of short, less useful connections, or they're kind of on the periphery of the area, or they have a nearby greenway. And the main one we're struggling with is, again, the Steele Mitchell Greenway at the top there. It does seem like in combination with Steele, it provides some good connectivity, but it's also, you know, it's not in the core Brentwood Darlington area, so we just wanted some feedback on that. It does also jog a lot. So, Misa?
Sorry, you kind of answered this, but again, whenever I look at Brentwood Darlington maps, I see big gaps and deserts, and I don't see a greenway. I see one on Harney, and then I see Tolman, and so Ogden is going to become a greenway to connect to Knapp.
Yeah, so I apologize. We meant to update this map to show the funded greenways because
Okay.
otherwise it looks like there's a big gap there, but there really isn't.
Right.
I think if you go to the next slide, I think we have some slides on that show this spacing. So this shows it a lot better. So this shows that these are buffers around the greenways. So for the north-south greenways, we have the 80s greenway in Lents. We have the 70s greenway, which is funded. We have the 60s greenway that's funded. And then this tier 1 project on 60th Avenue and the tier 1 project on 46th would sort of complete the network of those north-south connections. And then in combination with 52nd Avenue bike lane improvements. And then the next slide shows the east-west ones. And so there you'll see the Knapp Ogden Greenway, which is funded from 52nd to 87th. And then it shows how Tolman and Harney and the Steele Mitchell Greenways would complete the network. Yeah, so the reason there's that big gap there is that we have so many projects already funded for the Brentwood Darlington area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts?
I have one comment, just to be diligent about my position for the Woodstock and the bike community. This Knapp crossing on 52nd and 45th is considered really dangerous by most people biking with their children. I understand that it's a really convenient connection in this kind of whole scheme, also going down to, you know, all the way to the TriMet. But it's really problematic on 45th and 52nd to cross. And I would go 1 or 2 streets up north.
Yeah, we're definitely aware of that. And I think that's part of the next step, is to really refine these projects and figure out, is that exactly the right route? Should we go up another street? What kind of crossing would we need if we did have it on Knapp? So this is a little more higher level at the network perspective, but I totally agree. I've crossed there before and I know how scary it is. Yeah, if we do cross there, we would need some kind of like flashing signals for sure. So next slide, we can run through these pretty quick. So these local streets, we're treating a little bit differently. These are kind of like traffic calming programs and street paving programs, and a little bit different than just regular projects. You go to the next slide. I think we have a description of how we'll kind of treat these. So basically the long and short of it is we don't have a paving gravel streets program that's funded or anything like that. We have a program that's building gravel streets in certain areas like Arrow Heights and Cully and in Southwest, but those funds are specifically targeted at those areas. So right now we don't have anything like that. And we also have a traffic calming program, but it's completely programmed out for several years. So I think rather than prioritizing projects, we're going to kind of talk about in the plan how we try to address these needs. And so things like trying to do traffic counts in these traffic calming areas to make sure we totally understand what's happening. Try to do some opportunistic sort of things if we do repaving projects to try to add traffic calming. We would still have in the plan recommendations for what streets should be paved eventually and traffic calmed. But it's just a bit of a different category with these local street improvements. Next slide. So what we want to work on next, once we kind of solidify the tier 1 list, is that we're going to create these cut sheets with a lot more detail for the tier 1 projects. So we'll really say where we want crossings and what the cross section would be and all those kinds of things, and provide a lot more detail. So the next thing we could talk about is really getting into the weeds of how the streets would be redesigned essentially. Tier 2 projects, we would do less of that sort of project development on, but they would still be in the plan as city priorities and still be eligible for funding. Next slide. So yeah, that's basically everything we have. I know we're out of time, but really appreciate everybody's feedback, and yeah, definitely get in touch with any additional thoughts you have.
I think we're just to wrap things up here, and to highlight where we are in terms of the project timeline. We're in the fall. We've definitely gone beyond the conceptual to get into prioritization and things like zoning implementation. We'll likely have the first draft of the plan, the discussion draft. This is a little bit behind in terms of our current thing, but probably not till late winter, early spring. I just anticipate that we won't have a discussion draft out for a broader public review till probably February, but we're going to be working on refinement between now and then. Zeph, anything else to add in terms of that timeline? Some of the things, we are working on the actual Aurora Southeast Rising plan document now in terms of what its components are going to be, and just what information we need. We don't have the next project advisory committee scheduled yet, but it'll likely be sometime in early 2023. So in contrast to the 3 meetings you had recently in rapid succession, you'll have a little bit of a break in the heart of the holiday season. But just to entirely wrap things up, any thoughts as to what you want to make sure we explore or pursue as we continue to refine the plan, and just any other lingering thoughts? And we're pretty much out of time. If you have last thoughts now, that'd be great, but feel free to email us as well. And Cassie, will everyone have access to the link to access that zoning concept board?
Yeah, yes, you should all have access. I think we're trying to get comments wrapped up by Monday, right, Bill?
Yeah. And gonna stop sharing there, but besides leaving a little space for any final comments, wanted to really appreciate people's time. I know this was a long meeting and a packed meeting. There's a lot of stuff in there, so we really appreciate the extra time you put into this.
Do people know that there's the 3 little dots on the bottom of the chat that you can save the chat with? If you hit those and say save chat, then it'll go and it'll go back into save for you. Anyway, it's kind of useful.
That's a great tip. Thank you. Yeah.
And as usual, we'll share the video of the meeting and the notes of the meeting within the next week. So really appreciate all the time you put into today and throughout this is our 9th meeting. So thanks everyone.
Thanks.